I think Russia cannot really protect itself if it had to against China
The,
reclaiming. Now, again, I think China is not looking for that at the moment.
Hello, everyone. I am extremely delighted once again having a very special guest in the show, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He has been the Commander-in-Chief of the US Army in Europe from 2014 to 17, and he's one of the most respected military analysts worldwide. Let me also quickly introduce myself. My name is Christoph Müller. I host this channel in Germany in English and in German language for supporting Ukraine and democracy. You also can support me by giving a like and subscribe, or even think about becoming a channel member to make more interviews like this possible. Hello, General. So good to see you again.
Christoph, thank you for the privilege of coming back.
I'm very happy. There is today a lot to talk about again, and not so easy where to start. Trump's war on Iran, of course, but also the dismissal of Viktor Orban in Hungary. And then I'd like to zoom out again and link to one of our last talks when you mentioned the coming of collapse of Russia, perhaps. But let's first start with Iran. Was the start of this war on Iran an own goal for Trump?
It certainly seems that way now that despite several weeks of intensive combat operations, enormous expense, the Iranians still control the Strait of Hormuz. They still have nuclear weapons grade material. They still have the ability to strike targets in Israel and in Saudi Arabia and other countries. And they still have the regime. So I can't tell yet how it's going to finally end. But I don't know that all the great work done by the U.S. military has actually contributed to a strategic end state that is beneficial for the United States. So, I mean, if you go back 6 weeks, the Strait of Hormuz was open. There, I just don't know that we're better off now than we were then.
Yeah, it's for Trump. To me, it seems he is trapped and he likes to get out somehow. But and you said already, you don't know how it's coming out. But now he completely closed this Strait of Hormuz, and so the prices are rising even more. So
Well,
there,
we'll
there
see.
must.
We'll see. The Navy has begun their blockade of Iranian ports, and I imagine over the next couple of days. um that it will become more and more understood and effective. I mean, I'm proud of our Navy. They are very professional, and they have brought in a lot of resources to do this. I think there are like 16 ships that are involved on either side of the strait. They've got teams for boarding. They've got land-based aircraft that are there, and they're creating lanes. I mean, their focus is just on the Iranian ports, not on other aspects of the strait. The test will be, and maybe soon, when there's a Chinese flagged vessel that has been sanctioned, for example, if there's some sort of a confrontation with China or a couple of other countries, um, what comes from that? And these are the kind of things that I don't know that the president has fully understood or appreciated as one of the consequences. Now, maybe he did, but we have a visit. He has a visit with President Xi coming up
Mm,
in a few weeks,
yeah.
and I'm sure that the Chinese and the U.S. would prefer not to have had some sort of a confrontation before that meeting.
Yeah, Trump is bringing more and more troops also there. So are ground operations probably planned? So
I would imagine that the U.S. Central Command, has done their job in a professional way to lay out the options and the risk possibilities, and to begin to assemble the capabilities they would need to do that, so that if the civilian leadership, the president, tells them to do something, they will have thought through how they would do it and would be postured to do it. Um, I don't. Number one, I certainly hope there is no land operation there because um, I don't know that we want to get troops stuck in there, and that there are objectives that could be achieved that would make it all worthwhile. I mean, Iran is a huge country, so it certainly is not likely that they would be planning something to take over all of Iran. I could imagine some operations to take over, whether it was certain key infrastructure along the strait or other places that would enable the United States to really put more pressure on the IRGC. But I don't know that, and somebody like me that's retired should not know any kind of details like that. Um, I think that the best outcome will be the Iranians realizing it's in their own best interest to let the strait be completely open. And it looks to me that they actually, I saw this morning that they have offered uh, a counter offer regarding the nuclear materials. And, and
Yeah, it's
so
yeah.
I think they want to get out of this too.
Yeah, to me, it seemed like that Trump didn't want to leave the leverage to the Iranians that they can control the Straits of Hormuz and that they can make the prices go up or down as they like. So he decided, I want to close it myself, so I can decide. It looked to me like something like that. Um, but in fact, the whole world is suffering because of the higher prices, and Iran, as you mentioned as well. Um, so yeah, this is very. Let's see what's coming out of that. But it's Trump is not better off than he was before, and he neglected to have some advice of other people of that.
I think my sense is that he relied on his gut instinct. He talks about how he trusts his own judgment better than anybody else, and
Hmm.
um, he also has surrounded himself with sycophants that are reluctant to tell him, bad news or to disagree. And so that's how you end up in these kind of situations. Now, of course, this is not happening in a vacuum. The U.S. gas prices in some places are up over $5, $6 for a gallon of gas.
Wow.
That's unbelievable. Diesel, which is what, of course, all the big trucks that so much of our economy depends on, they use diesel. So that adds to the price. And I don't get the feeling that this is going to change much anytime soon. So the pressure on the president as we go through the summer, and you think about summer in the United States, similar to Germany, people go on holiday, and that's when you really feel the gas prices when you're going on a family trip to, to Florida or somewhere to Grand Canyon or whatever. Um, People will feel it. And this is also going to be right in the middle of the midterm election campaign season, where people are really seriously out running for office for the election in November. And so the economic impact of what's happening in the strait, and because of the president's policy, is going to be in the front of everybody's mind. And so I think the pressure on him from the domestic side, from Republicans, is going to build.
Yeah, you mentioned now elections, and let's switch to Europe now and focus on the elections in Hungary, which came out not as Donald Trump would have liked to be. Um, how is your take on the outcome of the Hungarian elections?
For me, this was some of the best news I've heard in a long time. To see Europeans celebrating, when you think back to 1956 and 1989, and these are proud people that were able to taste, some sort of liberal democracy, and then to have it taken away. So to see them, the celebrations is encouraging, and that also should mean that the Hungarian veto of EU money for Ukraine will hopefully be lifted soon after the new government is in place. That's what I would hope. And this is also important because it shows that the far right movements, that it's not inevitable, and that if Hungarians can stop it, then Germans can stop it, the French can stop it, and the United States, Americans can stop it if people turn out to vote. And that, I mean, there was no gimmicks here. You had a candidate who understood Orban, who understood Fidesz, and who understood that he was dealing with a situation that was completely rigged in favor of Orban, and he didn't shrink from that. Instead, he goes out and works through it and around it. And to get the sort of turnout of voters that they had is really inspirational. So this is useful to see that even though the president had so openly and publicly endorsed Orban, and he sent Rubio there in February, right after the Munich Security Conference, and then, of course, even more visibly sent Vice President Vance there just the other day for 2 days, and they lost.
Yeah.
This is important. This is powerful. People need to see that. And then finally, of course, Russia lost. I mean, all the information we know now of what between Suharto, the snake-like foreign minister of Hungary,
Oh, yeah.
and with Lavrov and Orban, and what they were doing with Russia, really, this highlights the fact that Russian influence is dramatically reduced. Russia failed in Moldova. They have failed in Hungary. They've done nothing to help their former ally in Venezuela. Iran, they did nothing to help Syria. Iran, I can't tell how much help Iran gets from Russia, but there is some for sure. But Russian influence seems to have taken quite a hit also.
Yes, I see it the same way, and that's a very good news. Let's just look at China. What do you think about this visit of Lavrov now in China? What kind of alliance are they trying to get out from your point of view?
This is a good question. I've never really believed that Russia and China were allies. I've always thought that China saw Russia as their junior partner or the little brother. China needs, obviously, oil and gas from Russia. And as the Arctic changes and becomes more and more passable for Chinese commercial ships, so the Chinese have an interest, of course, in what's happening in Russia, but I don't think they look at them as an ally. I think where they see common interests, they'll collaborate. Otherwise, I think China really would like to establish a reputation as the reliable, steady, stable sort of superpower, especially since most of the world now sees President Trump as unstable and unreliable. I was impressed that Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, in his visit to China, calls on them to, help stop the war in Russia's war against Ukraine, to get involved, to use its leverage for some good. We'll see if they do that.
Yeah, we are always we are always thinking about what's coming from China next. We all are afraid of they are going to attack Taiwan and want to include Taiwan as Russia tried with Ukraine.
Waiting to see what they're going to do. Now, of course, China has its own challenges economically, the demographics. President Xi has sacked so many of his military leaders. So I don't know. I don't have a good feel for the readiness of Chinese forces. They certainly have a lot, but that doesn't mean that they're ready to do something against Taiwan. And I'm actually not convinced that they want or are willing to launch an attack against Taiwan. A blockade seems a more plausible course of action.
I see it like that too, but uh, in the former Chinese territories, now Russian territories, since the long time, they just could go there and say that's Chinese. They put a Chinese flag, and the Russians could not do nothing about it.
You're exactly right. I think Russia cannot really protect itself if it had to against China
The,
reclaiming. Now, again, I think China is not looking for that at the moment. I think they have their own sort of set of priorities. Um,
mm, yeah. So anyway, the Russia is looking terribly weak, and that's good for us and for Ukraine especially. And Ukraine is fighting bravely and successfully. And the world is seeing more and more that Russia is absolutely not this superpower what they want to be. And my question to you: will Donald Trump, he who has such a great admiration for the Russian dictator Putin, that Trump will see that Putin is a loser? Trump doesn't want to be around with losers. What's your opinion on that?
that's a great question. Um, I have never understood this relationship. That the president, I think he has always envied Putin's sort of power and posture, and that Putin does not have to respond to media or the parliament, or he does what he wants. And I think Trump has always wanted that. And he would like to be, him and Putin and Xi, those are the three big guys controlling things, not some sort of international rules-based order or where he has to answer to the Congress. He hates that, seems to me. So at some point, he could jettison Putin the way he jettisons his own people that displease him. Um, I, but I'm not willing to predict where that relationship goes. I think a lot of it will be determined by domestic pressure. I mean, he's still got a lot of MAGA people that, were pro-Russia, which is something I just never imagined.
Okay, we can see huge movements of the anti-King protests, no King protests.
Right.
So if the pressure on Trump is really increasing. So okay, let's switch back to the last topic I wanted to mention, which is Russia. The Russian power is coming to deteriorate. That's how I see it. And how do you see it?
Yesterday was, I think it was yesterday, was the fourth anniversary of the sinking of the Moskva,
Mhm.
the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet.
Yeah,
That's 4 years ago. Amazing. And when you look at where the war is now, um, Russia is either been stopped or is moving backwards along most of the front. They still are able to launch drones and missiles against civilian infrastructure. They're still killing innocent Ukrainians,
yeah.
but you just don't hear the the narrative of inevitable Russian victory. It's just not out there. In fact, it feels to me that the tide has changed. The momentum has changed in favor of Ukraine. That doesn't mean it's almost over, that they're going to win, but it feels that way when you look at Ukraine's ability to produce um, capabilities that have stopped Russian forces, and they're even now helping the Saudis and others in the Middle East,
Mm.
which is going to be great because you've got when you have countries with those kind of financial resources that can start to buy Ukrainian capability for themselves, that will be very helpful. And then, of course, uh, apparently yesterday was the first time ever you had Ukrainian autonomous, I'm sorry, unmanned systems, robots,
Mhm.
captured a Russian position. No Ukrainian troops involved.
Really,
Now,
I didn't hear
this
that.
would have been a small scale thing, but if that works, you can imagine that they will begin to grow that capability too. So, the biggest development, though, is Ukraine's ability to destroy Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, specifically Russia's ability to export oil and gas. If to me, that's the path to victory for Ukraine. If they can continue to do that, then it really does become difficult for Russia to sustain the war.
That absolutely. Today I heard Stephanie Babs in a ZDF interview, and she said that she recommends now that NATO should get together also with Ukraine and the rest of the NATO states, except the United States, because they are out for the moment. She did that. That's my words. That's not her words. But she said that they should come together and talk about a new kind of relationship. How they do it. This. What could this mean?
You mean between Ukraine and Europe?
Between Ukraine and Europe and NATO, also Canada. That they should renew some agreement, because the pillar of NATO is the trust in each other. And Donald Trump, with his words, is undermining this terribly.
Yeah.
And so that was also what I said to Stephanie Babs a year ago. And there she said, no, there are alliances already. But now her words were very much clearer. She said they have to talk about, and especially with Ukraine, because it's the most powerful military force in Europe. What's your opinion on that?
Well, first of all, the best way to defend Europe is to make sure that Ukraine is successful, that it defeats Russia. So that's a good investment right there into Ukrainian defense industry, or giving Ukraine, selling to Ukraine what they need. So that's part of it. And then helping to destroy Russia's oil and gas export. So stopping the the Shadow Fleet vessels, for example, stopping Russian gray zone operations. These are all things that European countries could be doing that help its own security as well as helping Ukraine. I can imagine some relationships with Ukraine being bilateral or multilateral, even if it's not inside a NATO context. I mean, nations can always have bilateral relationships or groupings. I could envision Ukraine being invited one day to join the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is basically all the Baltic countries and Scandinavian countries and UK. Not an alliance, but a cooperative type organization. So Europe would be wise to be as closely affiliated with Ukraine as possible.
That's your suggestion, and I hope that the European leaders will hear that. Maybe German Chancellor Merz should finally be able to deliver towers now.
I would. I don't understand what the reluctance is there. I mean, I've always assumed it had to do with his own coalition and the other part of his coalition standing in the way of that. But I don't know. At some point, Germany loses that opportunity to make a real contribution, because Ukraine and others will say, okay, we're going to have to come up with our own capability and skip past Taurus. I mean, that'd be a missed opportunity for Germany to actually, do something of consequence here.
Yeah, maybe it's not too late. There's the battle is not lost, and the war is also not lost. So let's keep that. I see our time is already running out, and it was. I have so much more questions to you, General, but let's finish for today. Hopefully we can come back to another meeting another time.
I'm sure we can. I look forward to it, Christo.
Thanks very much, Ben Hodges. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.